So before we start the proceedings this evening, I would like to bring to the attention of all members, that the Budget Council has operated for a number of years under a procedure agreed between the group leaders, which is intended to structure the debate. The procedure note is in front of you tonight, and I would like to see a show of hands in support of this process. Thank you. Item 7. Can I please invite Councillor David Eaves to introduce the proposed council budget?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The budget put before you tonight, proposed by the leading group of this council, represents the only budget proposal published for full council to consider. Equally, they represent the only proposals that have been subject to the proper and appropriate financial and resource impact assessment by the officers of this council. They represent the only proposals that have been subjected to consultation and the only proposals that have been before the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Unfortunately, any amendments that may be proposed tonight cannot be subject to the same rigorous examination at this 11th hour, and I would urge all members to be mindful of that during the debate. The budget proposal put forward by the leading group is one that has regard for the current economic climate. This is the third budget that I have brought to Council, and is the third consecutive budget freezing council tax. This budget council tax freeze comes in contrast to numerous councils in the North West that propose considerable council tax increases, together with their considerable job losses and reductions in their services that they perform. This budget is the strongest that I believe that I have brought to Council. My aim when becoming leader was to produce a budget that was balanced with no call on reserves. The 2012-13 budget outcome delivers a favourable contribution to reserves of £956,000. This budget revenue growth includes continued support for the Fylde Citizens Advice Bureau, support for the Lancashire-wide approach to dealing with domestic violence, and the recognition of the great work carried out by rural parishes by increasing the amenity grant that has not been increased for a number of years. Capital items have been recognised, and investing in Kirkham Town Centre, Lytham Park Cemetery, Fairhaven Lake and Promenade Gardens. This administration has faced a huge challenge as a result of the reduction in government grants in the last 3 years, and expects harder times to follow. We have risen to that challenge yet again, producing this budget with no reduction in the quality of the frontline services that this council provides, providing high quality street cleaning, waste and recycling, parks and open spaces management and maintenance. This administration will continue to develop further saving proposals as necessary to ensure that revenue balances are maintained over the medium term in the light of the financial uncertainty regarding to the future impact of reforms to local government finance from 2013-14. The 5-year forecast is robust, with healthy reserves, ensuring a balanced forecast. However, the call on reserves remains in the long run and is a priority for this council to tackle in the next few years. The risks are made clear in the medium-term financial strategy presented as part of the budget proposals, risks that have been considered when preparing the budget before you. Mr. Mayor, this budget is robust and sets solid ground to work upon for the future. We planned to freeze council tax for 2013-14 and we've delivered. We said that this would not affect frontline services and we've delivered. We said that we would manage the council's finances despite the reduction of government grant, and we have delivered. In the absence of any other budget proposals, I urge members of the council to approve the only budget that has been published and available for consultation, put before scrutiny and impact assessed, with the budget before you. This budget has been out to full consultation throughout the wide business communities of the Fylde and featured prominently on the council website. Mr Mayor, not one adverse comment or enquiry has been received. This budget brings only good news. No frontline service cuts, no job losses, investment in the borough and the strongest, most robust financial position for years. I would now like to invite the Portfolio for Finance to highlight the key budget proposals put before you tonight and to recommend a motion to full council. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Members will be familiar with the format of the medium-term financial strategy. I don't intend to go through it line by line. Members will have had opportunity to read it thoroughly. It sets out clearly the budget cycle, the position at Budget Council last year, and the changes which have taken place until the point where we set the budget again today. The report, which begins on page 3, fully explains the background to the MTFS and its development, together with the local government finance settlement for 2013-14 and 14-15. To set this in context, it might be useful to turn to page 28 to have a look at Table 1. Table 1 on page 28, members will see that the reductions that have taken place in government funding to this council and the forecast moving forward. And it's in that context that we set our budget today. The trajectory is clearly for further reductions in spending. Moving on from that, section 16 sets out the risks to the revenue forecast, which are kept under continuous review by the management team and the strategic risk group. The conclusions, moving on to section 17 on page 36. The conclusions state that the council has a balanced budget for the life of the forecast. Then the report moves on to talk about capital and our capital programme. The additions to the capital programme in year are set out and have been funded by the local strategic partnership and also from in-year savings. They total £209,000. Again, the risks to the capital programme are fully set out for members. The MTFS before you also includes the earmarked reserves and the Treasury Management Strategy, a strategy which is regularly analysed by the Audit Committee. The overall conclusions of our Finance Director are found in section 23 on page 43. And there it is stated that the Council has delivered significant efficiencies and savings. Reserves are at a level that allow the Council to deal with future challenges, and the commitment to maximise efficiencies may result in an underspend against budget this year. Furthermore, at paragraph 23.9 on page 44, the Section 151 officer sets out his professional opinion that the Council's financial position, including the budget proposals, are robust for the life of the forecast. This strong financial position, Mr Mayor, has been achieved under this Conservative administration. Budget proposals, as we have heard from the leader, have been out to consultation and before our scrutiny committee, whose comments were favourable, tempered with a note of caution, which is understandable and welcome. The new business rates retention scheme was mentioned in the scrutiny committee and further information requested, and a commitment was given to provide a learning hour. The budget right-sizing exercise was welcomed by scrutiny, as was the change to the special expenses policy, which means that the borough-wide charge and the special expenses charge can be frozen. Our Section 151 officer was asked about the future fall in reserves and also asked again about how robust our finances are. Again, it's worth repeating that our Finance Director's opinion is that Fylde's finances are robust. We have a healthy picture going forward. However, we are in turbulent times and we must remain cautious. Having set the scene, I would like to talk to our budget proposals, the highlight of which, as we've heard, is a freeze in council tax. We recognise that household bills are of a great concern to our residents. Income is tight, wage rises are few, and fuel bills have risen considerably. Funding streams to councils up and down the land are also under fire, with government having to reduce spending. And income to the council is also under challenge, with fees and charges having very little room for manoeuvre. Fylde is meeting these trials head-on and has a great work ethic amongst our officers who are watching spending very closely. We have frozen council tax since 2010, but this is the first year we have managed to freeze the borough-wide charge, and I want to say a little bit about that to explain to members. The average figure, as members will know, of £186.29 on a Band D has been frozen previously, meaning that we do not collect any more as a council from year to year. However, because of the way special expenses are calculated, there have been fluctuations on the bills for residents depending on where they live. We wanted to find a way to halt this and tasked our finance team to look for a solution, which they have found. With a change in our special expenses policy, we have been able to freeze the borough-wide charge and the rate of special expenses, and the fluctuation is now on the average figure, the Band D charge, previously of £186.29, which now reduces by 0.2% to £185.92. And that's the figure that members will see on the appendix when they look at the 5-year forecast. The other budget proposals are set out at Appendix F on page 53. Or 55, whichever number you're looking at. Thank you. Yes. As we have heard, and I'll just very briefly mention these comprise increased funding for the Citizens Advice Bureau, funding for a Lancashire-wide domestic violence project, increased cleansing grants to parishes, and to mainstream support for tourism and events. In terms of capital expenditure, the Cabinet proposals to Council are for some additions to the capital programme to be funded from a reserve, previously set aside when we had the comprehensive spending review. The proposal is to close that reserve and open in its place a capital investment reserve to be used to fund this capital expenditure, which this will alleviate the pressure on borrowing. The schemes to be funded are set out before you: to fund a bid to the Heritage Lottery Fund for Fairhaven Lake and Promenade Gardens, a capital injection to improve public realm to Kirkham, and capital expenditure at our cemetery to improve drainage. The final budget proposal I wish to mention is to adopt the changes to the special expenses policy, which is set out at Appendix I, which includes the rolling out of the parks development function across the borough at no extra charge. This means that all parts of the borough will have access to this service free of charge, which is a great asset and has resulted, as we know, in some excellent new play areas in our parks. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to repeat that my thanks expressed at Cabinet meeting to our Section 151 officer, to his team, to the senior management and to all officers across the council who watch their budgets like a hawk. And with that, may I move the resolution which is set out on the tables before you. This is quite a detailed resolution, Mr Mayor. It includes all the budget proposals. It asks that Council adopt the MTFS. It details all the parish precepts as well and breaks down the total amounts that is taken in council tax, mentions gross expenditure, net income, and is very detailed resolution, but is necessary for this council to adopt. So with that, I'd like to propose to move that, and I have a second. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Councillor Reeves?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I stand to give my support and second the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I would at this point ask the Leader of the Opposition and non-aligned members to indicate whether they will be presenting an alternative budget or whether they will be moving any amendments. Okay, thank you. And amendments from any other member will be heard after the debate has taken place and the motion and alternative proposals or amendments from the Leader of the Opposition and non-aligned members have been concluded. So with that, Councillor Little.
Am I allowed to speak on the domestic violence issue as a
The debate is now on the motion. Substantive motion. The debate is now on the substantive motion.
Yeah. Yes, you can.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm pleased to see in the budget growth proposals a proposal for an annual contribution to a council-wide fund with contributions from LCC and Lancashire districts to address domestic violence. Domestic violence occurs in all parts of Fylde. 8% of all crime recorded in Fylde is domestic related, and 82% of that is violent crime. Domestic-related crime overall and domestic violence in particular have shown a statistically weak increased trend since April 2010. Domestic violence increased as a proportion of all violent crime in 2011 and 12 from 38% the previous year to 40%. The proportion is likely to increase further this year as at December 2012 it made up 46% of violent crime and historically has increased further in the last quarter of the planning year. Although the figure is up, this is a positive as it is a trend that victims feel easier in reporting domestic violence. Also last year we successfully built a business case for pooled funding to support the IDVA, the IDVA service in addition to the funding from Safer Lancashire. This year we are working on applying the same principles to the wider domestic abuse specialist provision. The DA commissioning framework is still being developed and will deliver a 3-year strategy for improving our response to domestic abuse. The IDVA services are fundamental, reducing risk to domestic abuse victims and their families, and therefore, pending a DA commissioning framework being implemented, we are offering 6-month extensions to the current IDVA contracts with the third sector provided to secure and stabilise the current position. I am happy, therefore, on behalf of Fylde Borough Council to support that budget item. Is that okay?
Thank you. Yeah. Any more speakers to the budget proposal? Councillor Pounder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's just to give some more information in respect of the amenity cleansing grants to the rural parishes. These haven't been increased for many years. They're now going to be increased by 5% this year and then will be increased annually then by RPI.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Oates. Councillor Nolte.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm very pleased to see that the financial position of this council is in a very healthy state, and I'm happy that we can have confidence in the work of our finance team and in what we're being told. I have no problems with the majority of the proposed budget plan. However, I have one or two concerns. One being the costs and length of time that it is taking to move the accommodation project forward. I worry that the capital receipts expected from our asset sites are moving in one direction downwards, whilst costs expected must be moving upwards in the opposite direction. I realise that the accommodation working group meet regularly on this, but as an ordinary member, it is something that I'm often asked about and have little informed knowledge of. I'd like a full report on the project timescales and costs at some time in the near future. I'm also concerned about the business rate retention element of our funding. It shows as a high risk area in the council, which I'm sure it is. We know so little about it that I'd like to see us put some time aside for an in-depth explanation and discussion on this topic, maybe a learning hour or two. Similarly, with the localising of support for the support of council tax benefit. I understand what is happening this year and that we've taken up the government's offer to help to keep the maximum percentage contribution to 8.5 this year. But I would like to know where this is going and how future years' percentage support is going to be dealt with. I realise that this is all very much the unknown at the moment, but I would like to be assured that we will be kept fully informed so that we can understand this when more information is known. This would also include the whole area of risks around housing benefits and universal credit impacts. I do not intend to put forward any amendments concerning these areas unless the portfolio holder and leader think it is necessary. I'm simply asking that the whole council is kept up to date with all that is happening in these areas. I also have concern about the level of general reserves that we are holding as a council. Whilst I agree that it is a good thing that we have healthy reserves, well above the 750,000 that is the minimum level, I do think that sitting on 5 times that amount at almost 4.3 million is a bit too much. I feel underspending a budget, as we did for 2012-13, leaves us open to criticism almost as much as overspend, and can only mean that something hasn't been done that could have been done. We need to consider this very carefully, especially in these times of austerity, while still making provision for hard times in the future that will surely come, possibly making more use of earmarked reserves. And I would just ask you to bear that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nolte. Councillor Silverwood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few words, thank you. We once again find ourselves in a position of considering a budget that doesn't really have that much wriggle room. We're faced with more government cuts to our grants, as we experienced recently with having to accept changes to our council tax benefits grant, which is going to be slashed with just a very small carrot being dangled by the government in the form of a grant for what we surmise is only 1 year. We're also in the dark about the new business rate retention and central government grant funding, as once again this is being thrust upon us by the government with very little information at the 11th hour as we prepare this budget. This is noticed in our papers as a high-risk area to the council, so I do applaud our Section 151 officer for his skills at using Fylde Council's crystal ball. I would like to invite all members and officers to Kirkham High Street to see phase 1 of our wonderful pavements and forecourt improvements. The £35,000 in this budget book, which is the match funding for LCCs, is gratefully received, and I'm sure you can understand we are eager to see the whole stretch of pavements and forecourts improved, in the same way as Ansdell has been fortunate enough to be fast-tracked in one fell swoop to the sum of 240,000 from last year's budget. Sadly, Kirkham has 4 phases to complete before we can stroll up and down our pavements, feel some pride and not trip up over loose flags. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I would just like to give some clarification about the accommodation working group. I have fed back to our group what's been happening in those meetings, but as anybody who is a member of that group knows, there is a certain amount of sensitive information that I have not been allowed to share. So that is quite impossible for me to share with the group.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Any more speakers? Councillor Ashton?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I'm excited today, Mr Mayor.
Good.
I'm excited because the Conservative administration of this council is setting a 0% council tax, following on from the county council setting a -2% council tax last week. This is what Conservative authorities do. They look after working families.
Councillors, please.
Mr Mayor, there's lots of good news in this budget. Lots of good news. We're supporting the Citizens Advice Bureau. We're helping with domestic violence. We've put money aside for Heritage Lottery bid for Fairhaven. And we're even supporting the parishes. As Councillor Silverwood said, we are helping out in Kirkham. I drove through Kirkham only yesterday to see how many empty shops there weren't in Kirkham. They're being supported by this council. And cast your mind back to a year ago when the opposition members were criticising us supporting Ansdell, another valuable town centre in my division as a county councillor. So we're doing the right thing by Kirkham, yet Councillor Silverwood criticises us because we're not doing it fast enough. Sometimes, Mr Mayor, you can't do right for doing wrong. We're looking after our cemetery, one of the only assets that makes us some money to support a revenue budget, and quite rightly so. Car park improvements I see year on year. We're looking after St Anne's swimming pool, and we're also delivering on the accommodation project. Long overdue, Councillor Nulty. The accommodation project has been going on for what seems to be a long, long time, and thankfully, with the cabinet we've got today and the new chief executive, we're actually going to deliver on the accommodation project. I can't wait, Mr Mayor. One thing that concerns me, though, is Councillor Nulty tells us that we've got too much money in reserve. Councillor Silverwood said there's not enough wriggle room. Could the opposition please make their mind up? Which one is it? Have we got it right? Have we got it wrong? Mr Mayor, I commend this budget to you and I commend it to the rest of the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ashton. Are there any more speakers to the motion? Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As only a minor point, I've raised this several times at Council. We've heard in the press, and Councillor Eves, in his party political broadcast at the beginning, told us that council tax hasn't gone up for the last 2 years. We're living in St Anne's. It has. I know it's special expenses and it wasn't too much, but it has actually gone up. So I don't know quite how you justify that with the announcements that have been made tonight and in the press. And I would also, just whilst I'm up, ask Councillor Ashton, when he was driving through Kirkham, was he doing it at 20 miles an hour?
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Any more speakers on the motion? Councillor Eves.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wish to attempt to give some clarity with regards to the accommodation working group. It is a cross-party group. It does meet regularly. There have been frustrations with regards to the sale of the assets that are to support the accommodation, the renovation of our town hall. I can say that that one has been completed. The sale of another is now simply down to signing a contract, and negotiations are ongoing with the third. It has been frustrating. It was a matter that I put high on my agenda to bring to some conclusion, following all the ideas that have been trotted around this council in the past. I found it interesting, actually, last week by reading the Lytham St Anne's Express, when in the 25-year section of of the reminiscing at what happened in the council, there was talk of actually building a new town hall. This has been ongoing with me since 2010. I'm determined to see it through. I have, at the last working group meeting, asked for a timetable. Because we are near to concluding these deals, I've asked for a timetable to be compiled by officers to be able to put before council and therefore bring all matters to the attention of this full council. The next meeting of the accommodation working group is on the 27th of March, and hopefully we'll have some further good news at that meeting. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Eaves, and thank you for the clarification, and we look forward to that report. Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Redcliffe? His name.
Somebody once said that I don't say very much at council meetings, so I'm going to try and put the record straight. As somebody who is a fairly recent councillor, I've got experience at setting budgets, and I always understand that budgets are not set as a means to themselves. They are a means to an end. They're not an end in themselves. This particular budget, I think, is something that not only Tim Ashton can be excited about, I think a lot of people can be excited about, because it seeks to deliver for our Fylde citizens. What do the people out there want? They actually want not to pay more council tax than they really have to. They want value for money services. They actually want the council to deliver the things that they actually value for themselves. And we are delivering these things in very difficult circumstances. One of the problems of budget setting is that you have constraints. You have to consider the actual funding streams. And we are all aware that we live in difficult times, that we actually are in challenging circumstances. And it's because of those circumstances that I think we should be particularly proud of the budget that we are putting forward here this afternoon. Because I genuinely feel that actually this budget is delivering for the people of the Fylde. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, are there any other speakers? Councillor Nash?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Every day I read the Local Government Association news, and it's quite interesting at the moment because there are so many councils that are cutting staff, that are cutting services, closing libraries, closing all sorts of buildings down, and many councils that are having to increase their council tax. And I was in British Aerospace today talking to a few of the people there, and I said, why do you come? Where do you live? We live in the Fylde. Why? It's a very stable, nice place to live. It is organised and we balance our books. And I think it's absolutely a real achievement that this Conservative administration has managed to balance the books, put money into the reserves, not increase council tax, and I commend this budget to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Nash. Right, any more speakers? Right, I would like to invite Councillor Rhodes, please.
I'd like to thank all our staff for helping to deliver a reduction in back office costs, which have greatly contributed to the delivery of this budget. I'd also like to add my thanks to the finance team involved over the last 3 to 4 years for getting Fylde into a much healthier financial position. Their job has been particularly difficult this year because they've had to deal with very late and cynical changes to future funding of local government by central government, who have introduced the business rate retention scheme. This will have a significant impact on councils, as future changes to business rates yield will directly impact on council funding levels. Unfortunately, the government has not yet properly explained how this will work, so there could be significant risks for this council and its future funding if there is no increase in business rate income. We must look into this scheme in detail and understand the future implications for this council. Additionally, the government has transferred responsibility for council tax benefit to district councils and instructed them to come up with a council tax reduction scheme. The really cynical part of this is the fact that the government has reduced their own forecast of funding levels, had the existing system continued, by 10%, giving councils the headache of how to fund the gap. And they are disingenuous enough to claim that there will be a fall in claimants at a time of low employment and a triple dip recession. This has also had the impact of reducing our tax base, which has lowered the number of properties we can charge council tax to, reducing income to not only this council but also town and parish councils. This really is a reprehensible thing to do. Town and parish councils typically and historically run very lean machines, so have no fat to cut. So it's impossible for them to make cuts without affecting services. Although a grant has been provided this year for town and parishes, there's no guarantee that this will be provided in future years. So great care has had to be exercised by town and parishes when setting precepts on a lower tax base, particularly as they'll have to be aware that capping could be brought in the near future. We believe that this council should go back to the government to ask them to rethink this policy. It's as badly thought out as the poll tax was and looks very much like policy made on the hoof. We simply can't keep accepting cuts to local government in this way. In recent years, we've been very prudent and reduced costs, but if these cuts continue, we'll get to a situation where the only things left to cut are services. Our rate support grant has also been savagely cut in recent years, reducing our income considerably. Over the last 3 years, the government has offered one-off grants to councils which have implemented a zero rise in council tax. And, mindful that things are very hard indeed for our taxpayers, Fylde in these very difficult financial times has accepted these grants. But each year that our council tax is not increased in line with inflation, then this becomes an indefinite year-on-year loss of approximately £445,000 per year. In light of this, we believe that we should have a plan B in place to cover the situation when freeze grants have ceased, so that we'll know how we'll be able to cover the shortfall which will exist. One other area of concern we have is in relation to the local plan timetable, and we'd therefore like to move an amendment to the core strategy budget on page 6.007 of the budget book. We're all very concerned at the impact the government's planning legislation is having on Fylde's greenfield sites. Fylde Borough Council is in a very difficult situation in defending aggressive housing applications on inappropriate sites because our local plan is not in place. Despite increasing staffing levels in our planning department, we are told that the plan will take a considerable time to produce. Time we don't have if we are to conserve areas of Fylde and provide development land in a controlled and well-planned way. I'd therefore like to move that a special and urgent council meeting be called to review the local plan timetable to see what options are available to appoint consultants to put together an evidence-based policy in relation to our 5-year housing supply figures and future housing and economic development sites in as short a space of time as possible. Funding for this will come from our reserves. We believe that if a reliable policy is made available to the DM committee, it will give confidence in the decision-making process and should lead to less planning appeal costs in the future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rhodes. Can I ask Councillor Rhodes, are you supporting the recommendation from A to J, plus adding this amendment you've put forward? Okay, thank you. Have you seconded? Councillor Nolte?
Yes, I'm very pleased to second the amendment made by Councillor Rhodes. It will come as no surprise to you that I'm happy to second this if you've been following your emails this last couple of weeks. I've spent the last 5 years trying to support my community in resisting major development, including the last 2 months working with a legal team to prepare a defence case for an appeal, and 5 intensive days in the public inquiry itself. I can assure you that none of you would have wanted to be me in this position. It has been totally demoralising and centres around our lack of a local plan, or even some of the policies and work leading up to it. I still optimistically hold out some hope because of the fantastic work put in by many Western residents. But I and those other councillors from this authority who were brave enough to take the stand were faced with a barrage of, but your council hasn't done this, done that and the other. We were told it would be 2017 before we could be confident in sites being available. This work desperately needs speeding up, and particular pieces of work need to be completed to help us in our stated aim from the notice of motion at the special council meeting unanimously voted on to preserve our greenfield sites. This affects the whole of the borough. Some may think I have been parochial in fighting, as I have, but it is a principle I've been fighting for. Keeping our green and pleasant filed on all applications. I've no idea at this moment, and I'm sure Councillor Rhodes hasn't either, which pieces of work need pushing forward, but I know several areas were key at our appeal. We need to do a complete review of where we're up to in the local plan timetable and which pieces of work will help us most, particularly taking ownership of the SCHLAR methodology, the 5-year housing supply and economic development land. We need a working group to look at this and to come up with a plan. We also need the flexibility to put some of this work out to expert consultants if necessary, without worrying about the cost implications. We also need all communities to have a scheme ready for public realm monies to apply for. Doing this will give more direction and confidence to the DM committee and should thereby reduce the amounts we incur in appeal costs. Without any of this, the DM committee may as well just stay at home. We are not just there to deal with house extension and fences. We need some confidence and teeth to deal with major applications. I urge you all to support this amendment for the sake of all our communities and residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nolte. Are there any speakers to the amendment? Councillor Fylde.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think if I start by saying the entire council, this council, along with previous councils, ever since I've been a borough councillor in 1979, is it, Lewis? 1979. We have all shared the same objective of protecting our open countryside. Our countryside is very precious to us and has received constant support. So that's the beginning. But I cannot support the amendment put forward by Councillor Oates and Nolte because there is a fundamental misunderstanding. And I don't know whether that misunderstanding is deliberate or not, but the issues are very simple. When Councillor Oates tries to, or Councillor Nolte starts making the point, we've got to take over the methodology behind the SLAR and our 5-year supply, we cannot take over the methodology. If we taking over the methodology contradicts government central guidelines to us and guidance, we will be overruled. We cannot create a situation which suits us but is contrary to national policy. And can I make great emphasis on the myth that if we have our local plan in place, this will give us considerable protection and allow us to defend greenfield sites when they are the subject of an application by developers. 12 months ago, I would have said yes to Councillor Nolte and Councillor Oates. Our local plan, if it was in place, would have given that protection. But the way things have evolved recently, I cannot give this council that assurance. There are examples throughout the land, but I will use one specific example, and that's at South Ribble. I have used this before, I have repeated on several occasions, but I visited South Ribble not long ago to see and discuss and debate planning issues with my equivalent. South Ribble are in a fortunate position, in inverted commas, that they have in place an adopted local plan. Within that local plan, they have allocated land for residential development, over and above that expected by the RSS. Now, you would have all thought, if you followed on the propositions made by Councillors Linda Nolte and Oates, that that would have given them protection for their green fields. And what has happened in the last 6 months? 4 rogue applications have come in, identifying green open fields for development. Those fields were not allocated in the local plan and were given consent against the council's recommendation for refusal. Were given consent by the local inspector or the government's inspector simply because they did not have a 5-year land supply that was deliverable, but deliverable now. Even though land was allocated in a local plan, it was irrelevant. They didn't have their 5-year plan in place. And I am sure, and I shared a lot of the time at the Morbreck appeal and realised that the main planning issue was the ability for any local planning authority to demonstrate a 5-year supply. We cannot. Individual members may feel that we can, but all the professional advice given to us suggests that our current position is only 3.8. And as has been described by the Chief Planning Officer, it's like the high jump in the Olympics. You either jump over it or you don't. And at 3.8 years supply, it is very, very difficult for us to defend applications that are coming into this department to proposing residential development in the countryside. I would, if the local plan and its completion was a solution, I would immediately stand to support the resolution and the amendment made by Councillor Oates, but it will not do so. And it has been a complete top priority by the leader of the council and myself and the members of the LDF steering group to move the local plan as quickly as possible. But the very nature of the LDF process, which is so process-orientated, money and resources have no impact. The number of times every small step has got to go out to public consultation and backwards and forwards is the main reason why it takes so long. It isn't a matter of resources. Lancashire County Council have offered us resources. The Planning Advisory Service has offered resources and guidance. So for those reasons, Mr Mayor, I understand and sympathise with what the move us by trying to make. I'm sure you're nodding and smiling. I must have got over with 5 minutes.
You have, yeah. Don't worry, don't worry.
I've never worn a watch.
No, don't worry.
I thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Nulty, is it? It would have to be a point of personal explanation.
Whatever, it's simply that I might have said I said take ownership, not take over. That meant making sure all members are understanding where we're going with whatever I was talking about. I wasn't saying take over the SLAR. I was saying that make sure that we all take ownership of it and we all understand what's happening.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Silverwood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, really, the whole point of this amendment is, we can sum it up quite succinctly now, is to protect us. It's so that we have a policy in place for the 5-year plan and to review the timetable, the timescale that we have now. It's just the whole point. This isn't political. This isn't challenging what's going on. This is to protect us because we know exactly what is going wrong.
Thank you, Councillor Akin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I cannot stand here and support the amendment. I'm very sorry. My sympathies are, yes, I would say I would like to see the local plan up and running ASAP. In November, I attended a seminar in Manchester from the Planning Advisory Service, and recently Councillor Odes and myself with Councillor Fylde attended an Inspector plus Planning Advisory Service at the Town Hall. The event in Manchester and last week's meeting both said 5-year supply plus are the fundamental important aspects we have to achieve. 5-year plus meaning 20% in our case. Yes, the local plan is important, but the 5-year plus the 20% is crucial to Fylde and any other local authority in this country.
Thank you. Any more speakers to the amendment? Councillor Ashton.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm reading out here from the full council budget meeting. It says here, no speech by any member may exceed 10 minutes and each speaker may speak only once. I've got to ask you, Mr. Mayor, why was Councillor Nulty allowed to speak twice? It's not on. We either have rules of debate or we don't have rules of debate.
Can you please sit down?
Sit down? I'm
yes,
about to finish speaking, yeah?
No, sorry.
This is ridiculous. I've not spoken yet to the amendment.
I am not prepared to take rudeness from any
There's
councillor.
no rudeness, Mr. Mayor. I'm just asking
carry
why
on.
can't we have a rule of debate? Stick to it.
Councillor Ashton, I asked Councillor Nulty if it was a case of a personal explanation, which she said yes. And she is allowed to come back to clarify what she had said.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I can't see it here on these notes.
Well, I'm the mayor and you're not, so would you please sit down?
And we had the same, Mr. Mayor, we had exactly the same last year.
What would you like? What would you like?
So anyway, if
point?
you'd like to speak to the amendment, which
okay.
I'd love to do, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
I'd just like to congratulate Councillor Odes on a party political broadcast on behalf of the Labour Party.
Councillor Ashton, please. Will you speak to the amendment and not make a political statement?
Mr. Mayor, I'm a politician. That's what I do.
Carry on.
We just heard Councillor Odes question the government's policy of localising business rates. And the reason for that, Mr. Mayor, the reason we localise business rates is to encourage councils like us to create jobs in our area. Because it's, in my opinion, it's probably one of the most important things we should do is make sure we create private sector jobs and improve skills in our area. And that's why the government has said to us, look, if you provide employment areas and create jobs, then we will localise the business rate and give you money. We'll incentivise you. Now, I don't know about you, Mr. Mayor, but I think that's a good idea. I think it's right that we should make sure we've got people with employment in our area and not unemployed. The second thing that Councillor Odes mentioned in her amendment, which she was questionising why council tax benefits should be localised. Well, I think this government's doing the right thing by making sure as much as possible of welfare is localised to make sure local people can determine what they should do with council tax benefit. I don't have a problem with that. Let us decide locally what our priorities are. And so many times I've heard complaints of central government making decisions that affect us and we have no say over. This government is allowing us to have say both on business rates and on council tax benefit, and I think that's the right thing to do. So that's why I don't support this amendment, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ashton.
On a point of personal explanation, may I say I have never been a member of the Labour Party, nor have I ever voted Labour, and I think it's time that Councillor Ashton learnt some manners in this council and stopped throwing aspersions about.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ashton. Right, have we any more speakers to the amendment put forward by Councillor Rhodes? Yeah. Councillor, pardon?
Councillor Buckley to sum up.
Yeah. Right, can we have Councillor Buckley, please?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I understand I can sum up on this particular amendment. And I do wish to say how disappointed I am that Councillor Rhodes talks down the recovery of this country. She seems to think that we're in a triple-dip recession. Well, I've missed that because I don't believe that we are. With the creation of a million new private sector jobs and unemployment falling and employment rising may not be as fast as we would wish, but I hope that this recovery in this country continues, and I would not seek to talk it down. And I also have news for Councillor Rhodes in the parishes, and she's concerned about capping. This council's subject to capping already, and we are asked to make tough decisions, and we do not shirk from that. And we have responsibilities that are passed to this council, and we take those responsibilities. We've given an undertaking that we will pass on as much information as possible when we have it from the business rates retention scheme, also from the council tax reduction scheme, and we will do that. I do remind members that the council tax reduction scheme did go before scrutiny, and they had the opportunity to look at it as well, and no doubt it will come back. But we have little information. We only have a grant of funding for us this year. That's the information we have, and that's the information upon which we made a decision last time this council met. And we await further information, which when we have it, it will be shared. Councillor Odes makes also much of the government's incentive to freeze council tax. I welcome the government's incentive to freeze council tax. She says she supports it, but her comments would suggest to me otherwise. The actual amendment that's put forward is not costed, it is not consulted upon, it is more like a notice of motion before this council. There are no figures put to it. This is a budget council meeting. I cannot support the amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we ask
No, we're doing this amendment first.
Right, okay. Right, we'll
Vote on this amendment.
right, we're going to vote on this amendment proposed by Councillor Rose. Yeah, please, can we have clarification on the amendment?
Yes, Mr Mayor, just clarifying that the amendment before us is supporting recommendations A to J, but adding an additional addendum to that, requesting that there is a special and urgent council meeting called to review the local plan timetable to see what options are available to appoint consultants to put together an evidence-based policy in relation to the 5-year housing supply figures and future housing and economic development sites in as short a space of time as possible, funding for this to come from reserves.
Okay. All those in favour of the amendment, please show. All those against? Okay, so that amendment was lost. Now, are there any non-aligned Any proposals? No? Okay, right. Have we any amendments wanting to be put forward from any of the councillors? Councillor Elaine Silverwood.
Amendment, I'd like to say I think Councillor Ashton gets a bit carried away. You're a councillor, you're not a cabinet minister, and when you're taking credit for the business rates retention, just remember you sit on the same council. This, I apologise, you know, it's sometimes difficult to resist, Mr Mayor. Thank you. And also, I have to say that Fylde Borough Council cannot take credit for the low number of empty shops in Kirkham, and really it's the valiant efforts of Kirkham and Weston Business Group and individual traders, not this council. Anyway, Mr Mayor, moving on to my amendment, thank you. The amendment I'd like to propose is with regard to the Tourism and Events Promotion Reserve. The budget proposal is that £30,000 be allocated to the wartime weekend event and other innovative ideas. I do accept that this wartime weekend is popular for both locals and tourists, but I would argue that when we are in such times of economic hardship, this money should be shared equally amongst the club day committees throughout the borough, where these traditional events are under constant threat of having to stop because of the costs of putting them on. In 2012, a total of £22,000 was spent on the wartime weekend. I have the detailed breakdown for this, and I'm both baffled and concerned as to why this event is not receiving sponsorship. An obvious sponsor being BAE, or it could be run by a private enterprise, as we've seen by the extremely successful Cuff and Taylor prom events, which, as we know, when Fylde Borough Council ran the prom events, which they deemed was innovative, it lost a lot of money. Also, I think this contradicts the St George's weekend, when there's £22,000 being put into the wartime weekend. The St George's weekend, when asking for figures on this, we as a council receive £70 rent. The figures for the wartime weekend, for example, say that it costs the council £1,330 to reinstate the green. So when the St George's weekend is on, who covers those costs and the litter picking? So, Mr Mayor, my amendment reads that £10,000 of the Tourism and Events Promotion Reserve be allocated to the wartime weekend, with the intention of making up the other monies required by finding a sponsor or private enterprise, and that the remaining £20,000 be evenly shared amongst the club day committees in the borough to ensure their survival. This is a far fairer way of using the £30,000 and will be seen as benefiting the whole of the borough rather than just one weekend event in Lytham. And I do have a seconder, and it's Councillor Rhodes.
Thank you. Councillor Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I stand to second this amendment in the main because of the problems that we're all going to have with our club days this year. We have been contacted by our local police who tell us that they are not going to offer any assistance to any club day this year when it comes to the processions. So there'll be a lot of difficulty in getting the street, the various people there to make sure that the processions can take place safely. I really feel that because of the traditional nature of our club days, and I know that in particular Kirkham and Westham's Club Day goes back an awful long way, and I'm sure all the others do as well, it would be an absolute pity to see a loss of the club days, because we're asking volunteers to find the money or find people to actually look after the streets and the roads on that day, and I don't think it's going to be possible. So I do believe that we should look at this and put some monies into those events.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. Councillor Silverwood, could I just ask that your amendment, that you agree with the Cabinet budget recommendations A to F, is it? Plus your amendment?
that, then no, I don't agree with it, because I put in forward the amendment to change what's in the papers.
Yeah, okay. Right, do we have any speakers to the amendment?
I'm going to support this. Bump. No, it's too near that. As a person who's actually been involved in running these carnivals and various things in the Fylde, the police play a tremendous amount of work into it in the Saturday. Once they cut that out, that means St Anne's, Lytham, club days, every club day in this borough is going to be affected. Now, I think that this council, and the way Councillor Rhodes, Silverwood has put this forward, I think that this council can help all the Fylde in its efforts to keep its traditions going of the club days, and I support the amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Jakes?
I stand to say that I don't think this should happen, that the money should go to the various field days and carnival days. I am speaking now as chairman of St Anne's Carnival. We always build into the costs of running the event what we have taken from 1 year, and we have enough in the bank to continue the next year. There may come a time when it is not sort of profitable, but it is something that is done by the local community, right? I've not heard about having to be charged for the police as such. Pardon? Right, but nobody has up to now. But we were warned about 3 years ago that this may happen. Obviously, we do rely on a lot of volunteers because it's something that the community can get involved with. We have always been an organisation that is slightly different to Lytham Club Day, where they spend an awful lot of money just putting on that parade. I know it costs about 16,000 or so. We work on a very small budget of about 4.5, and we raise money for charity on the back of that, and a lot of other organisations make money for their charities on the back of St Anne's Carnival. We do, as with all field days and club days, do have some input from the borough. We have the use of, say, in Lytham, they have Lowther Gardens at no cost. We have the use of the Ashton Gardens at no cost. So even though it doesn't cost us anything, it still costs the borough something. So we all do benefit from the services that the borough do provide. I think it's an awful lot of money to give, all right, and I don't want this to happen. I think everything should be done by the local people. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Councillor Fylde?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to say I'm a great supporter of Frackleton Club Day. Have been and always will be. I cannot support the amendment. The Parish Council finances and helps to finance the Frackleton Club Day activities. But what I am alarmed at is a point raised by Councillor Oates, and that is the threat, the real threat to parish carnivals and processions made by the police. And I think and I hope we as a council can get together, certainly the parish areas, and say to the police, for instance in Frackleton, we've lost our beat bobby, we've lost our police station. What we get for what we pay is very little. And I think this is the final straw. And I want to separate the two. The greatest threat to me isn't that this borough should finance parish council's carnival days. The greatest threat is the recent pronouncements by the local police that they will not in any way police crossroads and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fylde. Councillor Nolte?
Chairman, I would like to support this. I feel we've missed the point here, that the point is not what's happening already, but that in fact we would have to pay for the police to do the road closures, as I understand it. So although we already have our street wardens and what have you that stop the side streets, etc. It's the actual closing of the main routes that we would have to find from funds. Kirkham and Wesham have an active committee that raise funds and put the event on, and we don't benefit in any way from Fylde Borough Council in any of those things. We do, you know, we don't have the luxury of Lowther Garden being given to us or any other things, or Ashton Gardens as in St Anne's, but we do fund a lot of it ourselves, and our concern is that although this isn't an innovative thing, it is continuing something that has been going for so many years and affects practically every town and parish in this borough, and I would hope that people feel able to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chu.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I do believe that members on the opposite side of the room have not quite grasped how important that this is. What they perhaps haven't grasped is that without the police being there, you are not allowed to hold your event. And if the police are going to be there, you're going to be charged per hour, per policeman. And for every constable that is there, or every so many constables that are there, you have to have a sergeant. And if there's even got to be 2 sergeants, then you've got to have an inspector. I've already been involved in an organisation that's had to go through all of this, and it costs an awful lot of money. And I would be desperately sad to see all of the village galas and the club days disappear. The smaller villages, I'm quite sure, I don't know if Councillor Fylde, how they work their club day, but perhaps the parish council does support it. But in the smaller villages, it's not a parish council affair. They are completely independent of the parish council, and that they have to find their own money. So I think that this is going to be a death knell for an awful lot of our galas, and that would be desperately sad. What we're talking about is only asking for the war weekend to find its own sponsorship, or find some towards the sponsorship of holding that day. That is only one weekend. These galas cover weekends throughout the summer, and that would be desperately sad if they were to be lost by the wayside. And I honestly don't think that members understand how huge a cost it is to hire policemen. And without the policemen, no function. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Chu. Councillor Pounder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I, surprisingly enough, I'm going to object to the amendment. Now, I was chairman for 10 years of Staining Parish Council, and those that have been mayor will have known that. We have probably the longest distance for people to go, right from Normos right the way through to the village field. All the side roads have to be covered, and we do it with one bobby, because we've already obtained a road closure notice, so there is no vehicles on the road, and the people and the children can walk in without any relevance. You know, so as long as you've got a volunteer who will cover. We also have some barriers which we put on each road, and that stops vehicles coming out as well. The other thing that has not yet been mentioned is what the borough actually contributes. Because unless things have changed, any club day that wants a stage, we supply at the borough. Anybody who wants chairs, we supply at the borough. Anybody who wants bunting, we supply from the borough. So it's all well and good saying that the borough doesn't do anything. It does a lot. The reason that club days are suffering is not because of finances in most instances. It is because they cannot get volunteers to do the work. And as long as you can get volunteers, you will always continue for it to go. I have a village that only has one shop. So it's not like we can get sponsorship because you can go up and down Kirkham High Street and get something off each shop as a contribution towards your running costs. I have one shop I can go to. So my volunteers, or the people who used to be my volunteers when I was chairman, did a lot of hard work, fundraising, running events, to raise the funds that did it. And because they did that, that is what always made it as good as it was. It's because they'd worked hard for it, they'd raised the money, and they went on and did it. So using what is being said now is only an excuse for let's make it easier for ourselves. If you want something enough, it's like anything in life. You either save for it, work for it, or whatever. Yeah, but you're looking for somebody to take it off you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillors. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nash, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I oppose this amendment. On the one hand, they're telling us that we should be raising sponsorship for the 40s weekend, and then on the other hand, they want to dole out from the council. You can't have your cake and eat it. I think the whole point of this fund is that it is a flexible fund for innovative projects. Now, you can't say that the parish council galas and club days are innovative projects. They've been going on since as long as I can remember. There's more flexibility if you can bid on this fund. And for example, I'm looking at bidding on the fund for Armed Forces Day, and I can get match funding from elsewhere to go with it. And that's what I think the point of it is. We can use it flexibly. And if one of the parishes wants to bid for £5,000 for whatever they're doing, then they should be able to do so. But if you're just doling it out pro rata, then as Councillor Pounder's parish is going to get £5, and St Anne's will get an awful lot more. Secondly, yes, I know that there is a move in lots of councils where the police cannot any longer police the events. I'm putting together a team of veterans from the Fylde who are disciplined, trained, and they will be uniformed people who will be able to offer stewardship at these events, leaving the police to do police. It's early days. I'm calling for volunteers. I've got quite a few already, and I think you'll see them happen within the borough in the next 12 months. So I oppose this amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Nash. Please, can councillors remain quiet when the councillors speaking, please? Councillor Ashton.
Yes, can councillors remain quiet while councillors speaking? Love it. Chairman, I think we're confusing two issues here. The wartime weekend, the 1940s weekend, and the club days. They're two separate issues. This is setting a budget on the hoof. This isn't thought out. If you've got a problem with club day funding, it should be looked at separately. This is a green eye of envy from the rural members who don't like to see Lytham successful. And let's face it, Lytham's had a great year last year, and we're building on it. And please do not jeopardise that, because the amount of income it brings into the borough is substantial. Now, that's what we think of you. This is what happens when you elect the wrong police and crime commissioner candidate. On November the 15th, Lancashire chose Clive Gunshaw.
Right, councillors, can we have some order, please?
And in my opinion, they chose the wrong chap. Well, I have got some good news for you, colleagues, though. I have got some good news for you. In the County Council's budget last week, we've actually approved 4 new PCSOs for Fylde. Now, that's on top of the PCSOs that we've already got, not instead of them, on top. So you can thank the Conservative group at Lancashire County Council for giving Fylde an extra 4 PCSOs. Now, there's only one unparished area in Fylde, and it's Lytham and Ansdell. And we're unparished, and we're proud of it. Because we don't need to be parished. We've got a very successful club day in Lytham Club Day, run by volunteers, funded locally, and it's a great success. It's been going since the 1800s. What I suggest the members do opposite, if they've got concerns about Club Day, there are two rows to go down in my opinion. One is the Get Overview and Scrutiny Committee to look at it, look at where the funding comes from, look at what resources are needed, look at what volunteers there are and so forth, and do a proper job, not on the hoof at a budget meeting. This is a job that should be spent over a period of time. The Club Days don't happen until summer. You could look at it through the next few months and make a decision based on fact. If there's concerns about the wartime weekend, do exactly the same. Don't cut the budget at this meeting. It's just not right. Have a considered approach, take it to overview and scrutiny, make a recommendation to Cabinet. That is the way to do it. Finally, there's one more ray of hope I've got for you rural councillors, if you're short of money. Your county councillor has a fund of money at his disposal. What I suggest you do is ask your Club Day or Field Day committees to ask your local county councillor for some of that money, and maybe you will get some of it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ashton. Councillor Fazakerley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's very disappointing that this debate has degenerated into wartime weekend versus club days and carnival days, because it really isn't about that. I'm a tremendous supporter of club days and carnival days. I've been in them. I've run up and down St Anne's Crescent in a nightshirt with a little potty collecting money in my youth and other ridiculous outfits. So I'm heavily into that scene, not so much now I'm with the council, but in the past. And I'm disappointed, too, that this should come into the focus tonight, because some time ago I did ask Councillor Odes if any of her rural colleagues had concerns for rural tourism. It was following a debate where Councillor Chew had talked about the Great Eggleston Show. And I said to her, well, you know, Liz, we are interested in hearing of any ideas for rural tourism. Please come, put it to your group, and come and talk to me. Now, she hasn't come and talked to me since. I don't know if she put it to the group. I presume she did. But I am interested in helping club days and carnival days. And I feel a bit hurt, really, that it should come. It's a bit of a shock tonight that it comes into the open, when I would be more than happy to talk about that. It's not about one thing or the other. Just before I speak about the wartime weekend, I would like to clarify one or 2 points. The first, proms, didn't make a loss. It made a very small profit. Nobody made a loss, neither us nor Cove and Taylor, so I don't know where that came from. The St George's Day Festival pay for the reinstatement of the turf and any other expenses that occur. The wartime weekend, and I feel very personally involved in this, and very sorry that it's getting a bad press, because it brings in 25,000 people per day. Now, it doesn't bring them into Kirkham, but it brings them into Lytham St Anne's, and people who come for the first time, they see the area, and we always give credence to rural tourism. It's in our brochure. The rural parts of Fylde are just as attractive as the coastal strip, in my opinion. Additionally, Councillor Odes has benefited, I won't say personally, because it was her mayoral charities when she was mayor, and in subsequent years the mayor has held a stall at the wartime weekend, and I believe that it has been extremely profitable, perhaps the most profitable thing in the mayoral year. I know it makes a lot of money for mayoral charities. This wartime weekend, ladies and gentlemen, is getting the reputation for being one of the very best in Britain. And we hear this from the reenactors, we hear it from the stall holders. And it's been going 4 years. It is a tremendous success story for Fylde. And I think it would be very sad indeed if Council decided not to back it financially. Can I just clarify the exact cost of the wartime weekend last year? It wasn't £21,000 or £22,000, it was £19,501 and 8p. It was under £20,000 last year. And we try and cut costs every year, and Viv Wood works like nobody's business to keep the costs at a very minimum, and using volunteers when we can to run the event. So I would vehemently oppose the amendment, and I hope my colleagues will back me in that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ahmed.
Thank you. I actually have a lot of sympathy for the amendment tonight. I organise one of the biggest sporting events in the Fylde, 3 of the biggest sporting events in the Fylde, have done for 8 years now. And we get no sponsorship, we get nothing from the council. In fact, we pay the council. We pay £500 to close the road, we pay £2,500 to put the barriers up. It costs us £9,000 an event to put them on. And we've done this for years, and we bring in over 1,400 people to the Fylde. Now, most of those do not come from the Fylde. They fill hotels, they fill restaurants. We can do KPIs to generate actually how much money the people we're bringing in, how many miles they travel for, and we look at what we're actually generating as we bring it in to the Fylde. I look at the wartime weekend. I think it's fantastic. I agree, it is a great, great weekend. But why should they get it when nobody else does? And I'm sure with many sponsors around here, let's think Quadrilla, I'm sure would love to be involved in paying for something around here at the moment. People can make things more commercial. They can make things more self-paying. We mentioned Lytham Club Day. Club Days define the Fylde for me. They always have done since I've moved here 30 years ago. And there used to be big drinking days, if you remember, and there was competitions and how much you could drink, and that brought people in again. Maybe not the right people, but that's what they were. Lytham struggles for marshals. If you talk to Andy Fallow and the guys that have been organising Lytham for years, they struggle to get the marshals to make it happen every year. I struggle. I need 100 marshals. I struggle to get anybody out of Lytham to come and help. It's very hard to get volunteers in the Fylde to help you. So I have massive sympathy for the amendment here. However, I think that Councillor Ashton and Councillor Fisackley make a lot of sense, that this is not probably the place to do it in the budget. Tonight's a budget meeting. We've had a DM debate, and now we've had a Club Day debate, which have, in one way, proven categorically that the idea that Cabinet has killed debate and killed the Council to death. This has proved tonight that still works, and the Council is still very much alive. So whilst I have huge sympathy, and whilst I'm in the organising event debate, I think I've actually got to say I will not be voting for the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Easton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mayor, I apologise first of all for being late. I'm sorry. I tend to agree with what a lot that's been said by colleagues to the left of me, that we shouldn't be committing ourselves to one particular outfit, in this case the wartime weekend, that it's far better to leave a degree of flexibility where, okay, maybe with matching funds, as has been said, they could get some of that money. Maybe other people. I'm not suggesting, therefore, that we go as far as the amendment, which is actually to decide where this money should be used. The actual change, which has caused this quite significant and lengthy debate, is instead of having a £30,000 budget in Councillor Philaxis' control, so that it can help to pump prime the sorts of things that have been mentioned here. Instead, for some unknown reason, we're choosing to give all of this money to the wartime weekend. In other words, take the incentive away from them to do all the things that has been talked about. So I'm not suggesting, I'm really not talking in favour directly of the amendment, and if somebody will second me, and I hope somebody like Councillor Armott will, we just leave things as they are, where we have a £30,000 event promotion reserve which can go where it's most needed. And if we need to almost pump prime the police to do a little bit, well, it's there. And I think also, whilst the wartime weekend's popular, it's not everybody who wants to be reminded of it. And I do believe that if this was in the press, there are not people who would say we shouldn't be spending £30,000 just on that. You know, let's look forward rather than keep looking backward. That's not necessarily my own view, but I don't think we should be putting all that money that way. Nor do I think that they brought in 25,000 people last year. I believe probably 20,000 of those people would come on a good weekend to Livingston Downs anyway for general benefit. So what I'm really saying, if somebody will second me, is that we just simply forget this change and leave the budget where it is now as an informal reserve in the hands of Countess Fazakerly's cabinet group.
Councillor Easton, unfortunately you can't make an amendment on top of an amendment. You can vote for or against the current amendment, and if you wish to make a separate amendment after that, then you can stand to make a separate amendment after that. You will be after this amendment has been heard. I believe we've also got 2 others in line prior to that as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clayton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I stand to support the amendment, and then particularly responding to Councillor Pounder's comments. As one of the wardens that actually does involve themselves at Wesham for the Club Day event, we as the wardens are just simply the first line of defence. Whenever there is a problem, the first thing that happens is that you call upon the police. If we remove that police force by not having the support financially, if it comes to that, then this system will certainly not work. So I would be absolutely wishing to support the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any more speakers to the amendment? Councillor.
Councillor Fazakerly said that I hadn't been to her about this and she was very disappointed. The fact we've only found out about it within the last week or so is the reason that nobody has been to her. The police have only advised us in the last week.
Okay, thank you. Right, if we've no more speakers, we will take the vote for the amendment.
Okay, just to clarify what the amendment is, as far as I understand it, the amendment supports the budget recommendations A to J, but with the exception to the Tourism and Events Promotion Reserve in the following terms: that 10,000 of the Tourism and Events Promotion Reserve be allocated to the wartime weekend with the intention of making up other monies required by finding a sponsor or private enterprise, and that the remaining £20,000 be shared amongst Club Day committees in the borough to ensure their survival. This is a far fairer way of using the £30,000 and will be seen as benefiting the whole of the borough rather than just one weekend event in Lytham.
Thank you for that. Councillor Buckley, do you wish to, before we take the vote?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just think it's worth clarifying that this is a budget set aside for tourism and events at £30,000, of which, as we've heard from Councillor Fazakerly, the amount spent last year was under £20,000. So there is a proportion of that remaining for new events. And there's nothing to stop the council officers to seek reductions in that, efficiencies and sponsorship, nothing to stop that at all. But I think if we were to leave that open, it wouldn't enable our officers to get on and plan. This gives some certainty to say that we value this weekend, this event in Lytham. We want to continue with it. We will seek savings in doing so, but at least in supporting it, it will mean it can go ahead. So I think that just needs clarifying. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right. On the amendment, those in favour, please show. Okay.
13.
Those against? The amendment is lost. Right, Councillor Clayton, I believe you have an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish to propose an amendment to the recommended budget. My amendment, whilst supporting recommendations A to J, is to propose an additional recommendation. My proposition is, as the Council currently has no budget provision to cater for any ad hoc referendums, that a transfer of £120,000 is made from its general reserves in 13-14 by creating a budget heading to cater for such an event. And the reasons for that proposition, Mr Mayor, is that the Localism Act gives our electorate the legal right to specify the form of governance that their council should operate. Government has legislated that if a change of governance petition is presented to the council and signed by 5% of the electorate, a referendum will be held. I have noted recent comments from the leader that if a valid petition is received, he estimates it will cost in the region of £120,000 to hold a referendum. We are aware that the petition is gathering signatures at the present time, but as a council, we have no budget provision to cater for a valid petition being presented during this year. My amendment will not cause any increase in the council tax bill, so I hope it will be supported by colleagues right across the political spectrum. If the petition does not reach the required 4,000 signatures, or if it does, and a way can be found to avoid the referendum cost, the £120,000 will not be spent, and it will be available to go back into the General Reserve. I so move the amendment, Mr Mayor, and I do have a seconder.
Seconder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to second that amendment, and I'd like to reserve the right to speak later in the debate.
Thank you. Right, have we any speakers to the amendment? Councillor Redcliffe.
It's strange that earlier on we were talking about how we live in difficult times, and we were trying to freeze the council tax, provide value for money services, and talking to local people, this is what they really want. And here we are, having a debate about spending a completely irrelevant and unnecessary £120,000, 2% the council tax, 2%. I am not convinced, talking to local citizens, there is any will beyond a small minority group, any will at all for this change to happen. And I have a few questions. If this is such an important issue, if this is something that we really have to deal with, why was it not part of the election campaign at the last local election? And another point, if it wasn't a particular point, then why can't you wait till the next election campaign and perhaps allow the electorate to have their say about this issue if you think it's really important, and actually thereby doing so at no cost to the taxpayer? It seems to me that we are too free and easy with taxpayers' money. I really don't think that people out there are as concerned about governance. They are concerned, of course, about governance, but they are more concerned about the outcomes of governance, the actual decisions that are made, the things that are actually done by this council for ordinary people out there. We are not a political think tank. We might have different views and different ideas, but we're here to serve the needs of Fylde citizens. I am totally against this. I really think it is irrelevant and inconsequential, and I think it would be a waste of taxpayers' money. I am very much against this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Silverwood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, Councillor Redcliffe obviously feels very passionate about that. He's used the words irrelevant, unnecessary, inconsequential. Councillor Redcliffe, it is actually up to the residents of this borough to decide whether it's irrelevant, unnecessary or inconsequential. At the last general election, the Conservative, in their manifesto, the Conservatives made this strong point all the time about the Localism Act. All the time they were pushing that, saying that if they got in at the election, they would ensure that the people at a local level would have a say at local government. There is now an opportunity to do that. We only require 5% of our electorate, 4,000 signatures, to say, give us the right to change what we feel is undemocratic. And the point that everybody seems to be missing with this £120,000 that keeps being quoted is that once these signatures are presented, this council will have 6 months to decide, make a decision on and implement those changes that 5% of our electorate wish. If they don't do that, at least it gives these 4,000 people the opportunity to say, yes, have a referendum. And whether we like the 120,000 costs or not, we've actually asked the question of who has come up with the figure of 120,000, or is it a figure that's been plucked from the thin air? And one has to say, what price is democracy? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nolte.
Probably going to repeat what Councillor Silverwood said, but I do feel Councillor Redcliffe has missed the point. Probably not for the first time today. This is nothing to do with whether or not this goes forward. This is put forward because it has been stated that if the public democratically demand this, we should be prepared with an appropriate budget. Councillor Redcliffe is intent on denying our residents this opportunity. This should be properly budgeted for, no matter what the referendum is for or about. The public have a democratic right to demand this if they so please, and we should have something in our budget prepared for that. It wasn't us that came up with the amount that would be spent. This is what is being bandied about quite freely, that this will cost £120,000 and that it will cost us 2% of the council tax. In fact, increase the council tax by 2%. By 2%, I believe it has been stated. This would not happen. This would have to be taken from reserves, and I think that this should be put into reserves, as has been stated, from reserves into the proper budget heading for this eventuality. If it isn't used, then it is taken back. This is simply regularising what has been stated by a certain member of this council.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barbara Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was at the meeting of the pressure group, and I've got to say that when I go round talking to people in St Anne's, I've never once been asked about governance whatsoever. People want value for money, they want their services, and you talk about 5%. What about the other 95% who haven't signed it? Why should they have to pay for what is a minority decision? Why can't you wait till 2015 and then, if you still want to do so, go to the polls as we all will? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I stand to support Councillor Redcliffe and his observations to this council. I think he was very clear and precise and with all his comments. With regards to the question of where has £120,000 come from, I spoke with our Chief Executive with regards to what would be the cost of a referendum that would be held entirely on its own in similar circumstances to a local election, with regards to council resources, with regards to the costs of polling stations etc., throughout the Fylde, and that was the chief exec's advice to myself, and that is where that actually came from. With regards to all the other comments that have been made, I fully support, as I say, Councillor Redcliffe's observations, and I will vote against the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Any more speakers? Councillor Pounder?
Obviously, I'm going to speak against the motion. But I look around this council chamber and I wonder just how many of these members have actually sat under a committee system. You can put your hands up. Let me know how many there are.
Sorry, Councillor.
It's not a sideshow, Councillor.
No, I'm not. I'm just... No, what I'm trying to do, Mr Mayor, is to emphasise that people are talking about something they don't really know a lot about. And, you know, in fairness, all I'm saying is that, you know, we've been through this. I went through this in 2007, when on the doorstep there was a talk about whether we should have a cabinet or not. I went through it in 2011, when we talked about whether we should have a cabinet or not. So the public out there have had a very good opportunity to say whether they want a cabinet or not. And to allow only 4%, 4 people out of every 100 to make a decision that everybody else has to abide by is ridiculous. And let's be fair, we all know it is not members of this council who are actually pushing this instance.
Thank you.
It's not the public.
Right, councillors. Councillor Ashton, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We all know what this is about. This is about a referendum. The sheets are going around the shops in London St Anne's to remove the cabinet system and replace it with the committee system. Now, whether it comes from reserves or from the council tax, it is a complete and utter waste of council taxpayers' money. Over 2% of council tax it's equivalent to. Now, I was fortunate or unfortunate to having sat on the council when we had the committee structure. And it went something like this. An idea would come to Tourism and Leisure Committee. The Tourism and Leisure Committee would look at it, and it'd say, well, look, I don't know, we can't work on enough detail, let's set a task group up. So they set a task group up, the task group had a look at it, reported back to the committee would say then, oh no, we don't agree with the task group, we're not going to agree with what they say, we'll stick with the status quo. The minutes of the Tourism and Leisure Committee would then come to full council will have a debate like we are tonight, and they would decide that the task finish group had made the right decision, and they would overturn the Tourism and Leisure Committee minutes. That hadn't finished then. That wasn't the end of it, because what would happen then, it would come to the budget meeting, and the Budget Council would actually change its mind because it found out some more money. So it would actually agree with the original Tourism and Leisure Committee. So what I'm saying to you is, it was a long and drawn out and extremely painful process. Now, I'm not saying it happened like that all the time, but it happened like that a few times, and I witnessed it. I think the cabinet system is far better, much smoother. Overridden scrutiny is there to police what goes on, to come up with recommendations, to look at policy, and that's quite right. And to look at what the cabinet does. Now, if the opposition's got anything about them, if they're really keen on having a committee system, make it part of your manifesto commitment in 2015. That's what I'd do. Won't cost the taxpayer anything. If it ain't bust, don't fix it. I think the Cabinet did a great job. Tonight is witness of it. Said 0% council tax rise, no cuts to frontline services. In fact, we're seeing investment. Let's stick with that. You know, undemocratic, what a load of nonsense. What upsets the opposition is that we won the election. We control the council. That's what's wrong, and you don't like it. Trying to change it through the back door, through this committee system, is just not going to happen. Now, we all know who's behind. It's just not going to happen. Now, we all know who's behind. to Ashton Gardens that were long overdue. And you've got to ask the question, who's running the opposition of this council? Is it Liz Oates, or is it the Secretary to Fylde Civic Awareness? That's the question you've got to ask. Is it the dog wagging the tail, or the tail wagging the dog? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Point of clarification from Councillor Clayton, I believe.
Point of clarification.
Try again. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just remind councillors that the proposition is talking about simply the transfer of funds from the general reserves to the budget heading under the terms referendum. It's not tonight. I'm not asking for a debate on the pros and cons. I have my own personal views, but that I don't believe is the time now that we should be discussing that. All I'm suggesting in my original proposition is that this is put on the table so that funding is made available in the event of a referendum being called as a result of the 4,000 signatures. If that happens, it may not happen. If it doesn't happen, then that 120,000 will go back into reserves. So I want to make it very clear what my proposition is, rather than talking about the later stages.
Okay,
thank you, Mr.
Councillor.
Mayor.
Do the other speakers still want to speak? Councillor Fylde?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the very beginning of this evening's council meeting, the leader of the council, followed by the portfolio holder for finance, described the budget before us as being the most sound, robust, and in my 30-odd years' experience on this council, it's probably the best budget that I have seen presented to a full council. And this was qualified by the fact that much was made of the executive, whether you call it a cabinet, and just by the way, last time this council discussed the merits of cabinet or not, it was Councillor Duffy said the form of governance is irrelevant. It's the people who are in that governance that makes the difference. But the issue, when it was the budget was presented and described at the introduction of this evening's events, that this council has delivered significant efficiencies and savings to allow us to have this robust budget before us. What worries me isn't the £120,000, the simple cost of the referendum. Those savings in resources and efficiencies came about because of the very change in governance from a committee system to a cabinet system. And the costs of going back to servicing a committee system would make the £120,000 pale into complete insignificance, because you're going to have to take on professional officers at high salaries, and that will run into possibly hundreds of thousands of pounds. It's not the simple referendum. It's not the £120,000. You are going to have to change fundamentally the entire officer structure of this council. This gives me great concern.
Thank you, Councillor Fylde. Councillor Fazakerley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one or 2 points, I will be brief. What concerns me about this activity at the moment to try and achieve a referendum isn't so much the issue. I think the cabinet system is better, but I wouldn't go to war about it. But what does concern me is that by saying the cabinet system is undemocratic, we are condemning our national system of government, which is a cabinet system. We are saying that 28 out of 30 local authorities in the northwest of England are being run undemocratically. And I honestly think I must have been asleep for the last however many years, because I am totally unaware of a groundswell of opinion wanting a change. Nobody has ever mentioned this to me of the people I meet every day in the town. It just isn't an issue. As Councillor Redcliffe said, people are interested in the streets being clean, the council tax being kept low. They aren't interested in how that's achieved, as long as it isn't achieved by a bunch of frauds and there's malpractice and whatever. I'm not advocating that at all. The public are being manipulated, colleagues, by a very small, in fact, a handful of people. They are being manipulated, and I'm not going to name any names, but we all know the people that I'm referring to. And we need...
Councillor Ashton, please.
And really, we must not let ourselves be manipulated in this way. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the point here has been missed. It's not what a referendum will cost, but what has it cost in having the extravagance of a cabinet? I refer to what Councillor Ashton said. He talked about it being a complete waste of money. Well, that money doesn't need to be spent. But Councillor Ashton should know what a complete and utter waste of money is. It was when he was in charge of street scene that hundreds of thousands of pounds were lost by this council. If I don't want to get into the debate of it all, and I don't want to be political, but all I want to say is that if the public get enough signatures, if the public decide they want a referendum, there will be a referendum. And is it not right that we have money in the budget to pay for it? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I wasn't going to speak on this item, but I'm afraid I've heard such a claptrap tonight, I feel that I have to. We heard from Councillor Pounder that the public had an opportunity to speak on this. Yes, they did, and they voted to keep the committee system in place, but the Conservatives chose to ignore the public at that time. And I think if you go back and check the records, you can see that. I can tell you that the public in rural Fylde support a move away from the cabinet system. And when you see what's happened tonight, you can understand why. Because I think that we have put forward one or two quite reasonable amendments, but the usual block vote votes the way they're told prior to the meeting. And I think...
Councillors, please.
I think that that's why we do feel it is undemocratic. I feel it's undemocratic at Fylde. I think the cabinet system can work where there's a will to have consensual politics, but unfortunately at Fylde there isn't. And you can see that by the makeup of the cabinet and the chairs and the vice chairs of overview and scrutiny. Bad practice to have the ruling group in the chairs and vice chairs, but they do it anyway. Councillor Ashton asks who's running the opposition. I don't run anybody. We are independents. We are independents. And we make our own minds up on what to do. You've seen tonight the vote. We haven't all voted together because we vote as our conscience dictates and as we feel best for the people we represent. Now, we heard Councillor Ashton give us a lesson on committee structures. I would just like you all to know that, yes, Councillor Ashton was on the council at the time of the committee system. However, he didn't serve on a single committee. The only meeting he ever attended was full council, and you can go back and you can check the records on that. He was initially on tourism and leisure, and he removed himself from that, and he didn't attend meetings. So don't think you're an expert on the committee system, Councillor Ashton, because you didn't really experience it. The cabinet system was in place at the time of the debacle of the £700,000 shortfall in street scene, Councillor Ashton. You'll remember that very well. and also the Melton Grove affair. Would you like me to continue? And Councillor Fylde talks about the extra expense. I don't think there'd be any extra expense. I think that you would find we could make savings because there'd be less committees than we actually have now. I don't think we'll need this £120,000, so I don't know whether I'm going to support it, because I would hope that if there is a groundswell of opinion in this borough, that the council will listen to that groundswell. I feel that we need to all wait and see what happens. And, as I say, if there's a groundswell, I fully expect people in this room to listen to that. We'll wait and see.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. Can I just remind councillors, you might not like what's being said, but it works both sides. So please have respect for each other. Councillor Ashton.
Point of clarification. Councillor Oates, I sat on the Tourism and Leisure Committee and the Environment Committee, for your information. Secondly, street scene overspend, nowhere near £600,000, 200 and odd £1,000. No malpractice, no malpractice whatsoever.
Right, Councillor Ashton.
Mr Mayor, one further point. She blamed me for Melton Grove. Melton Grove was voted on by the full council, and I did not attend that meeting. I did not vote on Melton Grove, Mr Mayor.
Okay, right. Thank you for the clarification. Thank you.
I was not accusing Councillor Ashton. I was saying under the cabinet system.
Right, thank you. Now can we have Councillor Hardy, please?
Just recently, Councillor the cabinet system working well at national level and it's working well down here. What works well up in London doesn't necessarily work well down here or any other parishes or other towns.
Councillor Hardy, can we please get back to the amendment?
Yes.
I feel like we've gone really off track here, and
Well, what I was going to say, Mr Mayor, was we were elected, all 51 councillors, to represent our people in our own constituency and to work for them and their needs and everything and get things better for everyone throughout the file, not for 8 or 9 members to give all the decisions. That's where it's come to. And now that this petition's gone out, and people ask, I went to a lady's house yesterday and she asked me, well, what is it? What's it all about? You're on the council. I said, well, I don't have a say. Well, we elected you to represent us, and we're not representing them. It's the point of it all.
thank you, Councillor Hardy. Can we please keep to the amendment when you're speaking? I do understand that there's strong feelings, but Councillor Nash, Ed Nash, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Sorry you got us in stereo tonight. I wasn't here in the committee system, so I couldn't possibly comment on it. However, if you cast your minds back to May 2011, we had a referendum together with the election for this council and together with the election for parish councillors, and it was extremely cost effective. All I know is that we have talked tonight about prudence, and yet we want to put £100,000+ up, and that to me is not prudent. Why do we have to do it now? Nobody's answered Councillor Redcliffe's statement. Why are we not saying let's do it at the time of the next election, when we can have a referendum, a borough election and parish elections all together?
Councillors.
And we can make the most of the system that we got in. And I would also remind you that parish councils have to pay towards any election as well as the borough council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Aykroyd.
What I was going to say, sorry, Mr Mayor, what I was going to say was to remind everybody here that when we first went on to this system, we had what was termed an executive committee, to which the opposition councillors were on the opposite committee before we went to the cabinet system. And I know this is not relevant to this, and I'm sorry for that digression.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other speakers before Councillor Henshaw? Okay, then I'll ask the chair then to put.
Cabinet system can work, and has worked, and does work in many other areas. And you only go back less than 10 years on Blackpool Council, when the Conservatives were in control. They offered cabinet seats to the Liberal Democrat and the Labour Party. Because I know my friend Robert Wynne was the economic development cabinet member on Blackpool Council. When the Liberals only had Liberal Democrats only had 3 councils.
Councillor Henshaw, can you speak to the amendment, please?
And another point, I believe even our council leader, Councillor Eaves, was in sympathy with the committee system himself.
It's not too long, speak to
Is that correct, Councillor Eaves?
Right, thank you, Councillor Henshaw. Councillor Beckett.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was here when it was a cabinet system, but would it not be wise for this council to think ahead? 4,000 signatures. I didn't know anything about this petition and what's going on until I come here tonight. But wouldn't it be wise that if somebody comes along and demands, and we've got to make an election referendum, that the money's there? What are we going to do if it's not called a special council meeting to drag it out of reserves? Why do we have to do that? Why can't it be there, ready and waiting if required? That's all we're asking for it to be done. We're not asking for it if somebody comes along with 4,000 signatures, this council's court. No, put the money in, let's put it there, it can go back in.
Thank you, Councillor Beckett. Right, have we any more speakers to the amendment? Councillor Chedd.
Thank you. It's been stated that this could become an election issue. It was for many of us an election issue last time. It was certainly in my election literature, and I believe it was in the election literature of most of the other independent and ratepayer and Liberal candidates. And I mention that because it shows that the support is there. All those people that have voted for all those independent councillors will, I'm sure, sign this petition when asked. It's happening now, because it's only now that the Localism Act is allowing for it. And we don't want to wait. I say we. Yes, I support it, but this is happening. This is being driven by a grassroots movement, as has been stated. We don't want to wait because we don't want to see any further disasters from the current system. It's been likened to the National Cabinet, which is, the Cabinet at central government is very different. We had a lady at the seminar the other week when this activity was kicked off who explained a lot about how national government works. I've since contacted them with questions about the cabinet system, and apart from the scale, there are differences as to the degree of executive decisions that can be made and things that need to go back to Parliament. It doesn't compare with this situation. So, as I say, like it or not, the petition signatures will be obtained, and therefore we should allow for it in the budget. Now, I hope we don't need the referendum. I hope that the council will see that it's the right thing to do and give people what they want, But until we get a commitment for that, I think it would be irresponsible of us not to allow it for it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley, would you like to come back?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The reason I think that this council has debated the cabinet and committee system is because, and I take your point, that's not the amendment before us. The amendment before us is to budget for the petition that is out at the moment, and that's the subject of the petition. So let's not disguise that fact, because that's what this amendment is dressed up to accommodate that particular petition. And yes, it's true, there has been. We have campaigned on this issue at local elections, and the independents have failed on that issue. They've not been supported on that issue because this council is controlled by Conservatives under a cabinet system, and this is a means of whipping up a change by the back door. And I wholly support Councillor Redcliffe's suggestion that if this is their passion, which is absolutely fine, then save the money and go out and campaign on it at the next local election. Councillor Oates suggests that tonight shows us failings of a cabinet system. Well, I have to say to Councillor Oates, we're not in cabinet here tonight. We're in a full council meeting, having a full debate, and Councillor Hardy says he has no voice, but I've just heard him tonight debating on this issue. And to say that only 8 or 9 members benefit from the system under Fylde, I think all the residents in Fylde are going to benefit from a freeze in council tax. I also have to say that if the opposition engage with the leader and engage with the ruling party, they may see their voices heard a little more strongly, because I'm quite well aware that the leader has offered positions, committee chairmanships, vice chairmanships, and have heard nothing or have had those turned down. So failings may be at the door of the opposition and the opposition leader. Opposition members, look to your leader to see about engaging in this present system of governance rather than bleating behind the back door. So, Mr Mayor, I cannot support the amendment. We do not have a petition before us for us to say we need that money. If and when that happens, we will look at it. For the present state of time, we do not need to budget for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we will now take... clarification of the amendment.
Just, Mr Mayor, just to be clear, the amendment is from Councillor Clayton, while supporting the recommendations A to J in the budget papers, he wishes to propose an additional recommendation as follows. As the Council currently has no budget provision to cater for any ad hoc referendums, a transfer of £120,000 is made from its general reserves in 13-14 by creating a heading to cater for such an event.
Thank you. Right, we will take a vote on the amendment, although...
If it's supported by 5 members, yes.
Okay, I'll read through the members, and if you could indicate if you're either voting for, against or abstaining. So, first of all, the Mayor, Councillor Speak.
I'm abstaining.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Ackers. Councillor Aitken. Councillor Ackroyd. Councillor Andrews. Councillor Armitt. Councillor Ashton, Susan Ashton. Councillor Tim Ashton. Councillor Beckett. Councillor Brickles. Councillor Buckley. Councillor Chedd. Councillor Chu. Not here. Okay. Councillor Clayton. Councillor Cox isn't here, is he? Councillor Craig Wilson. Councillor Cunningham. Councillor John Davis. Councillor Leonard Davis. Councillor Donaldson. Councillor Eastham. Councillor Eaves. Councillor Fazakerley. Councillor Fydler. Councillor Wood is not here. Councillor Goodman. Councillor Goodrich. Councillor Hardy. Councillor Harper. Councillor Howard Henshaw. Councillor Karen Henshaw. Councillor Ken Hotwood. Councillor Jakes. Councillor Little. Councillor Barbara Nash. Councillor Ed Nash. Councillor Nulty. Councillor Odes. Councillor Pounder. Councillor Presswich. Councillor Redcliffe. Councillor Rigby. Councillor Silverwood. Councillor Threlfall. And Councillor Wilder. Okay, just give me a moment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Ian's just passed the results.
Oh, Ian's passed the results. Thanks, Ian.
That amendment falls. There were 10 voting for, 26 against and 7 abstaining.
Right, thank you. So we've 2 more amendments that I know of. Which is the next amendment? Councillor Chedd, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In the first of his several party political broadcasts this evening, Councillor Ashton mentioned the cemetery and the income that we get from the cemetery. Well, if he'd actually looked at the budget prior to the meeting, rather than just rehearsing his party political statements, he would have seen that the expenditure at the cemetery is in excess of the income at the cemetery. And this has been the case in previous years as well. In the past, when the opposition as a group has put forward an alternative budget, this is one of the things that we have recommended before, that the cemetery income, the cemetery charges should be increased to cover the actual cost of the cemetery, because I for one think it is wrong that the cemetery in Lytham, St Anne's, is subsidised by the council taxpayers of Fylde. So I therefore wish to put forward the following amendment: that the cemetery charges are increased to a level where they cover the cemetery costs. I think Councillor Ashton was getting mixed up with the crematorium, which does bring us in considerable revenue. Thank you.
Do you have a second, Councillor Chedd? Councillor Rhodes. Right. Do we have any speakers to this amendment? Would anybody like to speak? Councillor Little.
We are looking at the fees and charges to be increased. As my office just let me know, we are looking at increasing the fees and charges at the CREM. Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Little. Councillor Ashton.
A bit petty of Councillor Chedd to say that I was mixing up the cemetery and the crematorium. The two, to me, as a Fylde Borough Councillor, are interlinked. They occur on the same site and they should be looked at in the round. And from my opinion, when it comes to the disposal of people who've passed away, this council does a very good job, has an excellent facility, has invested in the crematorium, and I think, again, we're trying to make policy on the hoof at the Budget Council meeting. It's totally inappropriate to do it tonight. This is why you have an overview and scrutiny system that looks at policies, looks at procedures, looks at fees and charges, and then reports it back to the Cabinet. This is totally the wrong way to go about running a council. And, you know, if you think about it, if the opposition were in control, that's the way they would run the council. All the major decisions wouldn't be made by the Cabinet and then agreed at full council. We'd have a full and long-winded debate about the car park charges, whether we should have paper towels in the loos or hot air dryers. Where do we end? This is a budget council meeting discussing serious matters. It's discussing freezing the council tax for the people of Fylde. To me, it's an excellent budget. We're wasting our time with these amendments. Let's get on and agree the Conservative budget, which we're all proud of. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Have we any more speakers on the amendment? Councillor Rhodes?
Well, I have to agree with Councillor Ashton for once. We shouldn't be making policy on the hoof, but it's very interesting to hear from the portfolio holder that officers are looking at increasing charges. I would have expected the portfolio holder to have known that.
Thank you. Any more speakers? Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I please implore councillors, Councillor Chedd was at the scrutiny meeting last week, I think, when we presented the budget to scrutiny. That was the opportunity to raise these matters. We would have had time to clarify them and to answer them. We have scrutiny in place exactly for that purpose. It was not used for that purpose, and how he expects to put forward amendments that have not been tested or cannot be clarified, particularly on Budget Council, is beyond me. So please, stick to the procedure. We have good procedures in place. We consult on our budget. There is plenty of opportunity and time to put forward amendments, to put forward alternative budgets. If the opposition would do that, we would be able to test them fully. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we'll take a vote. Oh, sorry. Keep doing that.
Okay, as I understand it, the amendment supports the budget recommendations A to J, but with the exception of cemetery charges in the following terms: that the cemetery charges are increased to a level where they cover the cemetery costs.
Thank you. All those in favour of the amendment, please show. All those against, please show. Thank you. The amendment's lost. Right, we have another amendment, I think. Councillor Easton wanted to come back.
You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to seek another vote at this time of night and go back to the issue. The issue was about tourism promotion budget. The budget's there. It does split between wartime weekends and innovative events. I only hope the Cabinet will listen to what has been said by everybody and not over-subsidise the wartime weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Easton, for that. Right, vote on the substantive motion. Karen, right, we'll take the vote. All those in favour, please show. Councillor Ashton. Right, that's clearly carried over here. Any against or any abstentions? I would like to say to you all, thank you very much. I want to go home. Thank you. Thank you.
Is that so?